My name is Eric Peltzer, and my proposal for the Windsor Roundabouts project is a kinetic sculpture shown here as a computer 3D rendering overlaid onto the actual roundabout site. The theme and subject, two birds of legend, the phoenix and the firebird, physically and thematically intertwined. I'll go into these two legends a little more deeply, but in a nutshell, I'm using the phoenix here in red bronze as a symbol of rebirth and rebuilding, and the firebird in stainless steel as a symbol of limitless natural light and so alternative energy. The bird theme for me arose during our artist orientation in Windsor from a discussion of the history of the Windsor area, the Pomo indigenous people and their awareness of native birds and animals, and some further research that showed that they considered large native birds like eagles and condors to be spiritual bridges, conduits from the middle human realm to the upper spiritual realms. And birds have been used in many cultures with their flight coming to symbolize higher realms or higher ambitions. The phoenix story really comes from Greece, but it has roots in Egypt. The Egyptians told of a heron-like bird called the Bennu. The Bennu became associated with springtime planting and the sun in its daily rebirth, and was said to live for 500 years, and then it would die, and the younger bird would entomb the parent in a ball or egg of myrrh incense. The egg is, of course, a symbol of birth, and that may have been the source of the more familiar Greek story of the phoenix as a bird that dies in flames and is reborn out of the ashes. Now, I'm relating this theme of rebirth to, I suppose, an obvious event, which is the catastrophic fires of last year, and the resolve to rebuild and come back stronger. But to take this theme further to what is happening in the field of renewable energy. In energy, there has just been a long, slow realization coming to a head that, for many reasons, burning fuels is just not a sustainable practice. In fact, we are actually in the midst, probably early days, but just a complete rebuilding of the energy infrastructure, a humongous task, and communities in California are really leading the way in this area. It leads me to the Firebird Legend, which I just find a wonderful symbol of sustainable energy. There are many various Firebird tales in Russian and Slavic cultures. In one, a prince walking through the forest discovers a long magical feather that just glowed with this inexhaustible light. And he winds up with this feather in front of the Tsar. He's offered a reward, but one with risk. He was told to go capture the actual bird, but failure was at pain of death. And this proves a long, arduous quest. But the Tsar realized that to possess this bird, you would have a limitless source of light and a symbol of power. And I'm using the Firebird's unending glow to mean solar energy, wind energy, these renewable resources that really are kind of magical. They're plentiful, inexhaustible, free, but we do have a long, arduous quest to be able to capture these things. I first worked on a wind sculpture, I think in 1981, for my mentor, the sculptor George Baker, and over many years in working on his pieces and my own, I've made probably over 100 commissioned kinetic sculptures, motorized pieces, kinetic fountains, wall sculptures, but a wind sculpture is just so reliable. I've learned through endless trial and error and observation and putting these things up in many different environments, how to balance them to take advantage of the slightest breath of air. In this shot, the wind has risen to over 20 miles per hour, but I have worked out a strategy where the inherent configuration and aerodynamic shapes naturally slow themselves down in higher winds. The sculpture is still controlled and naturally arresting itself and weather vaning rather than whirling around wildly. Now, I want to point out the texture of feathers on this sculpture. It's called wind feathers, and it has a very intentional feather-like shapes ground into the bronze, and I would intend to use a similar texture on my proposed sculpture for Windsor. I'm sorry, my computer design renders that I've shown for the Phoenix and the Firebird don't show this, and that's just because I just haven't figured out how to model that texture well on the computer just yet. In most cases, if there's any air movement at all, even when there's really no apparent wind, the delicate balance and responsiveness of the shapes allows the sculpture to move. I did just want to highlight a current project that I'm just finishing up and should be installing in Baltimore at University of Maryland, which is a medical school. This is scheduled to be installed in mid-August of this year. It's a 30-foot high stainless steel wind sculpture with a theme that encompasses the two main areas of research happening in the building nearby, which is DNA and genetic research, as well as advanced medical imaging, and also has a theme to do with the history of the medical school. Here it's shown in a fabrication studio in Van Nuys. We're pretty much done with all the structural, and we've assembled the upper section, all the moving sections of the sculpture.